Welcome to Wargamers Shut and Build. In this tutorial, we're going to go over making some linear obstacles for your war machine tables. These are an important terrain feature. Unfortunately, they're fairly easy to build, so we're going to do that. Now, we have some foam board scraps here, and this is what we're going to be using. Now, what we need to do is we need to create some 6 by 1 inch pieces. Now, however many you want to make is up to you, depending on what you want for your table. I'm going to make 4, because for what I want to do, I feel like that's a good number. And we're just going to take a regular ruler. So I'm just going to start at this edge. We'll go to 6. Oops. It's okay. That's about a 6-inch piece. And we want to make sure that we are 1 inch. Just mark off our areas here. It's not the end of the world if this is a little bit, like a tiny bit bigger or a tiny bit smaller. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our trusty old hobby knife. And actually, we're going to cut off just a little less than this end, and we're going to try and do it at a bit of an angle. And then we're going to do the same on this end, which is why we left just a little tiny bit on that part, because this is 6 inches, right? So we're going to cut off the longer strips here in a similar fashion. And that's probably okay. It doesn't really matter what kind of linear obstacle you're making, as long as it's an identifiable section that you guys, being you and your opponent, can agree on it being what it kind of looks like. So I think for this one we're going to actually make it a wood fence, because I have a whole bunch of stuff for wood fences, and it's probably high time we use it. So, and this also keeps the cost of the project down. We're probably okay with just the stir sticks. Now, you might have these already. If not, they were $1.25, probably $1 most of your dollar stores. I'm just going to pick out a few of these. What we're going to do here is we're going to kind of play around with how we want it to look. Do we want it to be kind of a rickety fence? In which case, we would take maybe 1 or 2 side beams and then have several of these kind of staggered and haphazardly placed. Do we want like a super well-built picket fence? What do we want? We don't want it to be too high. Maybe up to 1 3/4 inches tall at the most, because then that will block line of sight to a small base model, whereas if it were taller, it would block line of sight to a medium based or a large base model. We're going to just go with kind of a haphazardly placed fence. I think that's probably okay. First thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to cut these down. Now, these are too long for our uses right now. So first, we're going to cut off the tips of each of these, because we don't want this soft, rounded edge that we have currently. And I'm going to use some fairly nice scissors. You can use little saws. You could use hobby knives, although hobby knives have a hard time cutting through this. You could use regular scissors. Just make sure that whatever you use isn't going to upset somebody who cares about those things. And these are just stir sticks, so you can make this. If you go to Starbucks one day and you pick up a couple extra stir sticks, that's fine. You can make this out of just about anything. In fact, we're going to make it look like it was reinforced with some metal sheeting. The way we're going to do that is we're going to take a miscellaneous coffee shop Bucks sleeve, and we've got that corrugated cardboard pattern on the back. That's what we're going to be using. We don't need much of this for these purposes. We're just going to cut out a square of this, and we're just going to set it aside for now. So we've got, these are all relatively flat-ish now. We don't want them to be exact, so it's fine if they're not. We're going to cut these into our planks, basically. Now I'm eyeballing it. Again, the important thing is that when you go to play with these, you agree with your opponent as to what they are. And that really is the only thing that matters. We want to make sure that these are appropriately sized. So this is probably still a little too big. So we're just going to trim them down another bit here. Okay, so we've got some planks that we can kind of noodle around with, and we've got these. Now, if you want to make these look even better, what we do is we take our hobby knife, and we basically just chip up the sides so that they're not so nice. And it can just be randomly done, but you really want to make it look a bit more worn. Even having parts like that is fine. That's kind of the look we're going for. We'll just skip to the next part, but you'll see after we're done here. Okay, so we're finally at the point where we've got enough planks for this fence, or this linear obstacle. And what we're going to do now, after we've trimmed out all of these, we're just going to break off some of the ends. And we don't want it to be super exact. In fact, it's kind of messy. That's probably better for us. And they don't all have to be the same length, but we kind of want it to be of a similar length. You kind of want to figure out what you want your guideposts to be. So which ones are actually stuck into the ground, I guess, and which ones are just going to be kind of hanging there, suspended in air. For those guideposts, do not break off the bottom portion. Here's kind of what we're looking at right now. We're going to set these up, and then we're going to have boards on both sides of the fence. So it's a more three-dimensional thing. So what we'll do is we're going to glue both of these pieces to these two pieces to solidify what our general shape of the obstacle is going to be. And for me, to keep things in perspective, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put a black line on the bottom of these two pieces, like that. I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, but the reason why I'm doing that is so that I know for sure that those are the sides that go down. And then that way, when I'm gluing the rest of my things, or rest of my planks in, I don't have to worry about messing that up. And there we are. There's our basic form. It is now a solid piece, and we can just start slapping other parts on. So that's what we're going to do here. And these parts, they don't have to touch the ground. They can. It doesn't matter. I'm going to make sure that they do look a little ramshackle, although they're going to be fairly widely spaced, or have irregular spacing, and they're also going to be leaning over, or something like that. So and actually, I'm going to do the first one on this side so that we can kind of overlap a little bit. We're just going to let that sit for a second. So now we're just going to cut off the excess glue, because we don't want that showing up in our painting process. Okay, there's our fence as it is right now. A note about the glue gun: it is fairly time-consuming to clean up all of the little glue dots. Using a craft glue might be better. Just make sure that you're giving it ample time to dry. And you might want to do one side, then let it dry, do the next side, etc. You can do it with a glue gun, though, and it's not that bad. It's just, it does take a bit of time in the cleanup stage. So remember how we marked these two planks with our Sharpie there? Now we want to just trim off anything that sticks out further than those two planks. So that one's too high. Instead of trimming, you could just break them off as well if you're careful. And that'll give you more of a natural look. And there we go. So as long as these two are the ones that have the contact points, or that will be the contact points, we're in good shape. at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to just cut slits into our base material, so we know where we're sticking these planks. And then we're going to just cut out a little tiny piece of paper where we can wedge those in. So let's take a look at that. So that one kind of fits in, that one kind of fits in, and that's sort of what we're looking at right this second. Now again, I mentioned that we wanted to make it look like it was reinforced with some metal sheeting, and that's where this comes in. So we want to kind of cut out just random squares of this. So before we get to that point where we start gluing those pieces on, we're going to actually glue these down, because I am very happy with how that's going. And again, our hot glue gun is a lifesaver in terms of time. Cleanup, not as much, but time, it's fantastic for. And I'm happy with this piece, so we're going to use that one. This one's probably pretty good. And we'll do like maybe one more, because we don't want to cover up the entirety of the bottom part, because we do want our fence part to kind of show through, as it does look pretty good. So front, it's currently the back. Probably want another piece over here, maybe a piece over here, we'll see. Now it also makes more sense why you could get cover from something like this. It is possible that a crouching model might, or a crouching person might be able to hide behind one of these sheets while some warjack's over here trying to shoot at you. And that's pretty much it for what we wanted out of this linear obstacle. Again, when you're talking about in gameplay terms, you're going to be looking at the base. Like, the base is what is the linear obstacle, but having a scenic kind of piece is also pretty nice. So you can see somebody tried to reinforce that in a haste and didn't have that many materials. So, but yeah, I mean, this is made out of stir sticks, a coffee sleeve, and a tiny bit of foam core. It doesn't cost anything to make this, really. But you can make a nice piece from a lot of stuff that's just kicking around the house. And that's super important, I feel. But yeah, we'll move on to the next step with this. Okay, so we're on to the next segment for our wall tutorials. And in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to use our spackle, and we're going to generate or create a ground texture out of it. So, if you watched any of our other videos, well, any of our other terrain videos aside from the how to create a turf video, you may have already seen this step, but basically we're just going to take our spackling. We're just going to kind of try and get it on. Now, you can use your fingers if you want to. In fact, it's a lot easier in some cases, so I may end up doing that. It is messier, but that's okay. And a smaller piece like this, using a big giant scraper, is probably the least ideal way of doing this. So I'm just going to use my fingers and I'm just going to spread it on. Because this part doesn't need to be super accurate. In fact, if it's not super accurate, it'll actually just end up looking more like ground texture. Not to mention we are going to sand down portions of it anyway. And don't be too worried about if it gets on any piece of your model. In fact, what you're going to want to try and do is, if you have little parts, like little metal bits at the bottom, covering that up's fine. It'll just look like the metal's sticking out of the ground. It's all the way around, all the way through. This won't take too long to dry, and we can sand it down if we want. I don't know if I want to yet. We'll figure that out afterwards. Okay, we're back to the next part of our tutorial. What we're going to do is we're going to just sand down some of the bigger bits that are on these walls that look like they might break off. We don't have to be super intense with the sanding. We're going to use our 120 grit sanding sponge. And if you've seen some of the other videos, this step is going to be fairly familiar by now, but nevertheless, it's important enough that we do. So, I'll take the one that we were demoing with, rather than the other three that I've made. And we'll just do this real quick, and then we'll move on to the next step. It's particularly important to pay attention to the edges around the outside of the base of the model. And the reason why that is because that's where you're most likely to have something break off, if anything's going to break off. So, Otherwise, you just want to, again, make sure you don't have any really sharp edges of your spackle. You can see there's like little bits in here, which we're not going to be able to get to, but again, unless somebody purposefully goes in there and busts them off, we're not going to have to worry about that. Plus, with the stuff that we put down in the next layers, it's probably not that big a deal anyway. You just, again, you just want to do like kind of a rough sanding job. Just make sure that you don't leave any super big overhangs. Okay, for this part of the tutorial, we're going to need our craft glue, or tacky glue, or school glue, whatever you're using. We're going to need a little bit of water, an empty cup, paintbrush we don't particularly care about, and our ballast. So I'm using coarse ballast and fine ballast. You can just use fine, you could just use coarse, it doesn't really matter. I like using both, but if you're going to only use one, I'd probably recommend the fine ballast, as it will give a reasonably believable ground texture. We're going to take a little bit of our water. I'm just going to put it in here. Just a little bit, not a whole lot. We don't need to dilute the glue too much. I think in our hill video, I diluted the glue a little bit too much. So for this one, we're going to keep it relatively thick. If I had to approximate, I would go maybe 1 part water to 2 parts glue. Then going to mix up our glue with our paintbrush that, again, we're not particularly fond of. We still want it to be a paste, but we want it to be able to work with it. We want to be able to paint it on something. Okay, so now we take our mixture, apply it to all of the places where the ground texture is going to go. We do have some pools of glue there that might be a little bit too much, so we can just kind of whisk those away with our paintbrush here. There we go. So we've got our glue on there, and we're going to take our coarse ballast and sprinkle it on. And we don't want to cover up the entire surface. If you've seen the other videos, you're aware of this step. And then we're going to cover up the rest of it with our fine ballast. And then we'll move on to the next step. I'll finish up the other 3 off camera. So when we get to the end of this, it's going to look like I've got a lot of terrain done. And we didn't go through it all, but that's okay. Okay, and this section is now done. Okay, so the next step is to base coat our model with black paint. Now we're just using an acrylic craft paint. You can use just about anything. Acrylic craft paint works. For terrain, you could use house paint. It's a really affordable way of doing it. If you plan on doing larger projects, you can pick up maybe like a quart. More if you're going to do gigantic projects, but a quart is fine. And all we're going to do is we're going to just dump a bunch of our black paint into our more or less empty cup. We're going to put a little bit of water in, not a whole bunch. Enough just to thin it down, make it a little easier to spread around our model, also get into some of those cracks. Because when you're doing any kind of painting, especially on terrain, it's really easy to not get all of the model in. For the base coat, you generally want to try and get as much of it as possible. You'll see for the next step how we can kind of cover up some mistakes, but that's okay. Now the first thing I do is I wet the brush. And I wet the brush so that the water seeps into this portion of the brush, so you get less paint that sticks in there. That'll be what ends up ruining your brushes long term. Granted, these are dollar store brushes, so this step may or may not matter that much for you. Just try to get most of the water out, and then I'm going to mix up our paint and water mix. Okay, so here's our model. We're going to basically just cover the entire thing with our black paint. And for this one, we're just going to hang on to it by, we want to find a place on the model that we're going to hang on to it by that is going to be consistent. So I like this joint right here. So this way I don't get paint all over my hands and everywhere else. Yeah, we'll have to go back and touch that up once the paint is dry, but that's not a big deal. So we'll just kind of start slopping on the paint. Now for this one, having a thinner paint is going to help a whole lot, but you want to be careful about using too much paint on the cardboard areas. If you find that you're going to have a hard time getting into some of the little recesses, just go over once, let it dry, and then start picking out those details with a smaller brush, and you'll have less problems with the cardboard warping. It's only relevant for this step, because once there's dry paint on the cardboard, your next steps won't affect it anywhere near as much. But yeah, that is something you want to keep in mind. So we've got our first bit on there. Just a little bit more I want to get. I mean, obviously the more you get done in this step, the less you have to go back and fix, but sometimes if you find yourself going over the same piece of cardboard over and over again, it is going to warp a bit. Now, on the bright side, with this being kind of a ramshackle sort of fence, the cardboard warping means that our metal is going to look a little bent, which is not bad, actually. It'll be okay. You just want to be careful about overdoing it. For this step, we're going to dry brush on some of our apple barrel craft paint. This is 20432 Nutmeg Brown. Doesn't really matter. I like to use a mid-tone brown. Doesn't matter if you use craft paint or not. It just tends to be the cheaper option. So I'm just going to get some onto our palette here, which is just a plastic sheet. It can be anything really, preferably something that's not paper-based, but that's okay. And for those of you that may not be aware, all dry brushing is getting a little bit of paint, or some paint on the brush, trying to wipe off some of it. We'll wipe off some of it on a paper towel here, and then applying it to our model. For this step, we want to do a heavy dry brush. So basically what that means is we want to cover most of the previous layer of paint, leaving only the deepest recesses. And the way you do that is just quickly brush over the top and just go over it until you're happy with the result. We're going to dry brush over the entire model here, including the metal parts, the fence parts, the ground parts, all of it. We're going for a quick piece of terrain that's going to fit with the rest of our stuff. So we want consistency, and we don't want to spend a huge amount of time doing all of this. You don't have to put a lot of effort into it. So this is where we will start to see the results of our efforts in terms of trimming down all of those little wood pieces, because some of those details should start showing through. Now, we're not going for diorama quality here. We are going for tabletop quality. It's going to look good at a tabletop distance, and we're going to be pretty happy with it, I think. Okay, for this next step, we're going to take our Apple Barrel 20432 Nutmeg Brown and our Apple Barrel 20405 Antique White. And we're going to mix them together. Now, we don't really want that much Antique White, which is kind of a cream color, because it'll lighten things up considerably. But we do want some, so we're going to put some of our Nutmeg Brown, and then we're going to take just a little bit of our Antique White. And we're going to mix that up and see how that looks and see if we're happy with that color. That's pretty good, actually. I'm pretty happy with that. And if this doesn't work out, you can always add more brown in. You can always add more white. One word of caution, though, is if you put way too much white, you're going to waste so much paint putting in more brown. You might be better off just doing it again. But so now we've got kind of this creamy brown color, which is good. That's what we want. We're going to, again, make sure that our paint is fairly dry. We want to make sure that it's not wet. We don't want to sop paint onto this. If this step is messy, that's okay. We can basically fix just about any screw up here. But as I was saying in the previous step with this model, the previous layer dries fairly dark. So what we could do actually is we could just dry brush the base and maybe a little bit on the metal bits, and then leave the wood. In fact, I think that's what we'll do, just to get a good idea as to how easy these can be painted up with, if you're on a compressed time frame. So we'll just do the rocks here. And if a little bit gets up on top, it's not that critical. It's not a huge deal. So let's try and get a little bit onto the metal bits. Give those a little more definition. Okay, for this step, we're going to take some kind of metallic color, preferably a silver or a metal. This one's a plate mail metal from Army Painters, one of their war paints. It's what I happen to have laying around. It doesn't matter which one you use. I would caution against using metallic paints from the craft store brands, simply because they tend to have lower pigment counts and they don't tend to work quite as well. We just need a little bit here. We're also going to take our sponge, and we're going to rip off a piece of our sponge. Doesn't have to be a big piece, just a little piece is fine. And we're going to sort of do the same sort of dry brush technique. We're going to take a little bit of the paint here. We're going to get some of it off. We're actually just going to dab this onto our metal bits here. And basically this is just going to show that this was a metallic at some point. So, the same on the back. Doesn't have to be super precise. And that's basically it. Now, if we have one more thing we're going to do here once this dries, but because this might be a little too stark, that might be a little too bright. Because we really want to just we want it to be identifiably metal, but we don't want it to be like way over the top, super bright, because it's not going to be polished if it's been sitting out there for quite some time. And one thing you could do is you could put more black into the metal mixture, and that'll make it a little bit darker. Conversely, we could mix some of our previous layers and mix it in as well. But what I'm going to do here is we're going to need a little bit smaller paintbrush, and this is just one I have laying around. It doesn't matter. Normally, I just use a dollar store paintbrush for this kind of thing, but this is a Games and Gears Pro Studio brush. It was I got it in a Kickstarter, and honestly, I basically just use them to spread glue. I know that they sold them as these fantastic paintbrushes, but I wasn't that impressed. So I basically just use them as hobbying brushes, which you know, some people might have had great success with these. I haven't, and that's fine. But yeah, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to take just our nutmeg brown. We're going to dilute the hell out of this. You could use a black, you could use a darker brown, and we're just going to just get it all over this thing, all over the metal parts. And all it's going to do is just going to mute the shine from the metal a little bit. It's not going to be that significant. And right now it all kind of blends together, but once we get the ground texture on, the metal bits will pop a little bit more. Okay, so we've got our model here. As you can see, it did mute the metal bits a little bit. Not a whole lot. Like, you can still tell they're kind of shiny, and that's okay. For the base of our model, we're going to use the turf that we created in the turf blend tutorial. We're going to take our little wall here, or little fence, dilapidated fence here, and we're going to take our glue. And really, we just want to kind of get a bunch of the ground texture. Personally, I like to make sure that I get the sides, and that's the most important part to me. A lot of this comes down to personal preference and what you think looks cool. So I'm going to leave a little bit between the fence section so that we can see some of the ground near the bottom of the fence. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with where I've got the glue. From here, we're going to take our turf blend. So we're just going to basically dump this on to anywhere that there's glue. That basically leaves us with our terrain piece. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. Share this with your friends. You'll see these being used in battle reports, and we'll do an overview of the table and its terrain when we get to the point where all of our terrain's finished and we can use it.